Attention local government leaders, don't miss Fast Track 2025, Victoria's premier councillor leadership forum, happening Friday, May the 2nd. Join us for an intensive day focused on leading with integrity, featuring an exceptional lineup including Melbourne Lord Mayor Nick Rees, Victorian Ombudsman Marlo Barraguareth and IBAC CEO Alison Byrne. Gain valuable insights on conduct, fraud prevention and CEO management while networking with industry peers. Plus, enjoy a special keynote from comedian Anthony Lamo-Learman. Fast Track 2025, equipping you with the tools to serve your community better. Register now at the VLGA website. Hello, welcome to a special edition of the Local Government News Roundup. It's another instalment in our popular Well-Travelled Executive series, where I speak with leaders from in and around the local government sector about their career journeys, professional and personal highlights, lowlights and learnings, and in some cases we get some insights into what might be next for them in their careers. As always, the podcast is brought to you by the Victorian Local Governance Association, the national broadcaster on all things local government, with support this month from Symphony 3, Simple, Connected Customer Experiences. I hope you enjoy today's episode of the Well-Travelled Executive series. My guest today has been out of the local government sector for a little while, but keeping himself busy, and I thought we'd find out what he's been up to. It's John Nevins, the former CEO of Kingston City Council. John, welcome to the program.
Hi Chris, pleasure to be with you.
Great to see you. How have you been?
I've been very good of late. I've been semi-retired now for 5 years, Chris.
Yeah, gets away, doesn't it?
It does. It does. It took a while to adjust to the fact that it was okay to wake up on a Monday morning and not feel guilty about not going to work.
Yes. Yeah. I must admit, I got used to that very, very quickly. So what does semi-retired mean to you?
I like to have spare time and be free to choose to do different things, recreationally, travel-wise, but also like to have some professional interests. So I've been fortunate. I am involved with LG Pro, and after I retired from Kingston, I did some consulting, quite a bit of consulting work for the MAV, and I did an acting role at Macedon Ranges as CEO for 6 months. But then I found myself involved on a Bass Coast Health Finance and Risk Committee as their independent for 5 years. Recently stepped back from that. I was on the board of the Paran Market for the Stonington Council for a couple of years.
Right, yes.
Absolutely enjoyed that. It was a great experience, worked with some wonderful people at the council and at the market. I do some workshops for LG Pro, Introduction to Local Government. I do probably 7 or 8 of those a year.
Fabulous. So you're still involved. You're still very much connected to the sector.
I'm still doing things, and I chair the Finance Audit and Risk Committee for a not-for-profit. And I'm on its board as well. It's called the Snowdome Foundation, and that raises money for blood cancer research. And I have an interest in a technology business, and I chair the board of that, a company called Symphony 3, Chris.
Symphony 3 is a supporter of the Local Government News Roundup, so very, very pleased to hear that they're getting your expert guidance.
Thank you, Chris.
So, I've had conversations with newly former CEOs and those who are thinking about the next phase, and they're often worried about whether there'll be enough to do, whether they can find things to do around the sector and still be relevant and helpful. But there's lots of opportunity, isn't there?
There is, Chris, and for anyone who's the CEO planning that next stage of heading into retirement, semi-retirement, don't wait until they retire. Start to put the feelers out before you walk out the office door. Develop, use your networks and your connections. But there are opportunities out there. and it can be a very rewarding experience, Chris.
Good advice. The acting role you did at Macedon Rangers was for about 7 months, I think. Would you do more of those interim gigs if they came along? Because there's been no shortage of those opportunities as well.
Oh, there's certainly not. Yeah, I'd drive up I'd stay at Kingston during the week, so I'd drive up Monday morning and come home Friday night. And I did that for 6 months. And I thought the people I worked with up there were wonderful, great group of counsellors. And I was approached a couple of times after that, but I didn't want to live out of a suitcase, Chris.
Yeah. Location's a big part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed the work. It's great space. But yeah, I thought, no, I kind of like being around home.
Yeah, fair enough too. Let's go back to the start of your career path, because you didn't start in local government, but you did start in government, didn't you?
Yes, I've always worked in the public sector. I was a clerk of courts decades ago, Chris. It's funny, the place where I started as a clerk of courts was at the Cheltenham Courthouse, which is about a couple of 100 metres from the City of Kingston council offices.
Oh, isn't that a
yes, I started my public life a couple of 100 metres from where I finished it.
Yeah. And what's your recollection of what that was like, being the clerk of courts? That was a pretty big deal, that role in those days, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, well, I worked in the suburbs, and then I was transferred to Bendigo, and I was up there for probably 3 or 4 years, and you had to do exams to qualify as a clerk of courts, and I did all of that. And then one day, my boss, a guy called Keith Lewis, who went on to become a magistrate, and the chief magistrate at Bendigo, a fella called Arthur Curtin, called me into Keith's office, and they said, "What are you planning to do, John?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, what do you want to do with your career?" I said, "I like being a clerk of courts." And I said, "Have you ever thought about going to university?" I said, "Well, I completed HSC and I did okay in my HSC." I said, "Well, here's the phone number for Monash University and here's the phone number for Melbourne University. Why don't you ring up and see if they'll take you on?" So I rang up and Monash said yes. So I drove to Monash University the next morning and enrolled at university. Then they arranged for me to be transferred back to Melbourne. And I went to university part-time for 6 years.
Right.
As a clerk of courts, based at the Melbourne Magistrates Court and then at the former Sandringham Courthouse complex. And I did an economics degree. And whilst when I was doing that, I was seconded. A guy called John King was the former secretary of the law department, and they wanted to set up do a review of the productivity in courts, and it was around magistrates' courts would start at 10 o'clock, finish at 4 o'clock, but your caseload they could be sitting till 3:30 one day and then finish at 11 o'clock the next day. So I was in a group and we developed a thing called the booking system and the mention court system, which is now throughout Australia. Right. And that came out of a project team that I was on, and that catapulted me into a different work environment. And I never went back to be a clerk of courts after that, Chris. I then went to different parts of the public service and then into the Public Transport Corporation and ended up in an area called the Rail Vehicle Maintenance Group, which had all the workshops in Victoria, Bendigo, Ballarat, Spotswood, Newport, the tram workshops, Epping Railway, Epping maintenance workshops. And I worked on that, and that was in the era of the Kennett government. And in the lead up to that election, this is the time when you had the trams welded to the tram tracks in Collins Street because there was huge disruptions in the public sector in the lead up, and the Kennett government was elected, and myself and a couple of others in the Rail Vehicle Maintenance Group could see what was going to happen. It was going to be privatised. And we put together a business plan on how to reform the rail vehicle maintenance activities of public transport in Victoria. And it was taken, my boss, John Barry, at the time, took it to Alan Brown, who was the Transport Minister, he took it to Cabinet, and the Victorian State Cabinet ran with it. So
Mm.
we had the role of reforming all the workshops, the maintenance workshops in Victoria. And I was on that task force for a couple of years, and it was very successful. And I could see it was coming to an end, and I looked around, and there was local government being restructured, and they had
Right.
commissioners, and
Yeah.
I'd always had an interest in local government, but to get into a senior role in local government, you had to have a town clerk certificate unless you were an engineer. It was pretty much a closed workshop. Anyhow, they opened up positions. They said amalgamated councils, appointed commissioners, and they spilt positions and they advertised roles. And I applied for what was called the Director of Strategic Management at the City of Boroondara, which was, in plain English, it was the corporate services role.
Yes. Yes.
And I was successful. I got the
Wow.
role there and worked with the commissioners for a couple of years. And I'll always remember that Philip Storer, Philip's still at Boroondara, and he's
He
been
is.
long-term CEO now. And
Yes. Yeah.
he said to me, John, don't get used to these council meetings only going for half an hour. He said, when the councillors get back, you'll still be here at midnight.
That was prescient.
Oh, it certainly was.
Yeah. So just hang on. I just want to pick you up on a couple of things you were talking about there. So you very clearly didn't have a long-term plan. You were responding to issues that were happening in the wider political environment and recognising opportunities. Is that fair?
Yes, and I was looking for the challenges, and with the challenges came the opportunities, Chris. And
Yeah.
at that time in 1995, 30 years ago, the most dynamic public sector space was local government in Victoria. Hugely important part of the Victorian public sector, and it was compulsory amalgamations, and the job was to improve the efficiency, improve the responsiveness of it. And I'd always been interested in local government, but there was never an opportunity to get into it, Chris.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Okay. Yeah.
and under the commissioners, there was the opportunity, and I went for it. And
Yeah.
Chris, I went there thinking, 5 years maybe, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
30 years later, I'm still talking about it and still motivated by
it's
that sector.
it's in the blood now, isn't it?
Oh,
So
it is.
it occurs to me, if that conversation about going to university and getting some qualifications hadn't happened, all of these follow-on steps probably wouldn't have happened. Is that fair?
Wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, because these days you often hear people say, "Oh, people with degrees are a dime a dozen. Everyone's got them now," and there's talk that having an MBA is not worth what it used to be. Do you still see the value in that educational path for career opportunities?
I do. I think whilst it may be more common for people to hold tertiary degrees and master's degrees, it doesn't dilute or it doesn't diminish the importance of those academic achievements, Chris. It's just that more people have those successes in their lives. It just raises the bar in terms of the competition. So in terms of looking to hire people, whereas an undergraduate once might have been the top of the interview list, but these days it could be, well, they've got a graduate degree, what's their master's degree, what's their experience? But having said all of that, we've all worked with and known people who are academically exceptional, but it'll get you the interview. It doesn't get you the job. It's the interpersonal skills, the emotional intelligence, how calm you are, how you can absorb pressure, how you can relate with others, lead other people, manage tasks. These are enormously important aspects. It's not just whether someone's got a degree or not.
Yeah, that's really well put and good advice for anyone listening who's perhaps at the earlier stage of their career path. Really important to have those skills as well. So, John, let's go to the city of Boroondara. It's a newly amalgamated council, along with many others around the state. You've come in as a director, so you've come in fairly high.
Yes.
In the org structure. At what point did you start to think, I could be a CEO or would even want to be a CEO?
I was very content in my role, and after we had a long-term, I reported to a long-term CEO there, a fellow called Michael Kennedy.
Yeah.
Michael was very good. And then Michael took a role at, he moved to Mornington Peninsula.
And he was there for quite some time, wasn't he?
He certainly was. He was long-term at Mornington as well. And they needed an acting CEO at Burundara. And I didn't think I was qualified to apply for the role of CEO at Burundara at that time. So
yeah.
I said I wasn't applying. And some of my colleagues were interested. So anyhow, by default, I ended up being appointed acting CEO at Burundara for 3 months.
Right.
In between Michael and his successor, a guy called Peter Johnson. So it was, whilst acting in the role of CEO, I thought, I don't mind this. And actually, maybe I could do this.
And so, just to be clear, you had that opportunity because you'd indicated you wouldn't be an applicant for the position, and some of your colleagues were. So, in terms of fairness, okay. So there you go. That's interesting how that plays out sometimes, isn't it?
It was fortuitous, and I acted in that role for 3 months. Thoroughly enjoyed it. The councils were very supportive. My colleagues were very supportive of me in that acting role, and then I spent another 6 years at Burundara, and towards the end of that, I thought I really liked the local government sector because I moved out of the corporate services role. I was in that role for 5 years. I had all the functions under that. Then I moved into what was called the Director of City Works, and I had that role for 6 years, and that was your parks and gardens, your depot operations, your engineering, capital works, traffic. So it was very much community focused.
Yes.
And you spent a lot of time engaged with different community groups over different issues. Chris, you've been there. It's traffic, street trees, it's parks, gardens, sporting VV and sports grounds. It was a dynamic space, but I enjoyed it. I found it very rewarding, and then I thought, hang on, I think I'd like to stay in this sector. And because local government, it's people talk about it being a level of government close to the people, and it is. But in local government, you actually get to make a difference. People walk outside their front gate, excuse me, Chris, walk outside their front gate, and the street trees, the footpath, the curb and channel, the road, they walk around the corner to the playground, they go to the library, they go to the swimming pool with children, or they participate in a particular sport. That's all local government.
Yep.
That is all local government. You get to make a difference, and you can have a positive impact on how people live their lives and where they live. And that got into me. I was highly motivated by that, Chris, and I wanted to do that, and never left.
You make some good points about the breadth of services and the infrastructure that local government provides and manages. And it often comes up in a discussion about the spread of the rate burden, doesn't it? People not understanding what their rates are actually funding. They might say, well, I don't go to the library, so, why should I have to pay the same rates as the next person? I'm sure as a CEO, you probably got embroiled in that conversation many times.
I did. And my response was, it depends on the stage of life you are at. If you're a young person, you're probably using the sports grounds or the shared path network for running, riding your bike. If you own a pet, you're taking your pet to the parks. If you have children, they might be going to the swimming pool, the kindergarten, childcare centre. If you have elderly parents that you're looking after. In those days, it was home and community care. That's a different space these days, of course.
Yeah.
But you might have to use the maternal and child health care services. So I said, depends on your stage of life, on what services you're exposed to. But every time you walk out your front gate and you've got street lights in your street, that's your rates paying for those street lights. Those street trees, That's the council doing that. That, that when it rains and all the stormwater is discharged and carried away from your property, that's the council drainage network doing that. So I would talk about it in those terms. The stage of life you are at and your personal circumstances dictate your exposure and utilisation of local government services.
Yeah.
Local government, they're there to serve tens of thousands of people, so they have a broad spectrum of services.
Yeah, well put. So we're through about, if I'm following this correctly, about 11 years in director roles at Boroondara. So what happened next?
Well, Rob Skinner, long-term, he was the original CEO of City of Kingston, and Rob resigned. And I thought, Kingston, gee, it's 8 kilometres drive from where I live to the city of Boroondara. It's 11 kilometres to the city of Kingston, and that looks a pretty nice area. So yeah. I did my research, I put my application in, and I still remember the interview. It was at the old Homes Clean TAFE facility in South Road, which is now the Homes Clean Hospital site.
Right.
I had my interview there, and my second interview was down near the Mentone offices at the Mordialloc Nursing Home in the committee room there. And it was a very small committee room, and they had 7 councillors in the room and myself, and we're practically sitting, elbows tucked in beside each other.
So you're getting up close and personal from the outset.
It was a second interview, and we were very cosy in that room, Chris.
Well, that might have been a tactic to see how you manage the pressure.
They were a great group of councillors, and they offered me the role, and I stayed there for 15 years, Chris.
Yeah. So what year was this where you picked up the role at Kingston?
I started there in January 2005.
Right. Okay. So you'd been there for quite some time. I want to get on to a major issue and time in your life in just a moment. But as you took on that role of CEO, was it what you expected, or were there elements of the role once you were in it that perhaps you hadn't been quite prepared for?
I'd always been told that when you're the CEO, the nature of your relationship with the councillors changes. You are no longer one of the general managers or the directors that they talk to. You are their person who they go to give them support and advice in addressing their issues. And that's true. It is. It's a different relationship. You are the council's only employee. So that's a statement of fact.
Yeah.
So if there's an issue the council needs worked on, they need advice on, they need action on, of course, you're the CEO, you're the person they're going to talk to. And that's how it should be. And there were some major issues. There was one at Kingston. It had plagued Kingston at that time. It was called Chiquita Park. Mm-hmm. And some people who will be listening into this podcast, when they hear those words, they'll probably have a cold shiver run down their spines, Chris.
Really? So what was the story there?
It was land that the council sold, and then they sold it. It had multiple versions of what it was going to be used for, but eventually it was used for residential development, subdivided. And it was an issue that tagged on for probably 4 or 5 years.
And divisive in the community, was it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was the issue that I had pretty much 10 minutes after I walked into the office as CEO of Kingston. But met with the councillors, had a discussion and agreed a process. This is the process that we work through. And the councillors agreed. This would be so here's the process. We start, we go through these stages, and then you get to this point, the end point, and then you make a decision. And you'll make a decision based on the options put forward, the community feedback, the evaluation, and your objective judgment at that decision point on what you think is the best outcome for the community.
Yeah. And this conversation, I feel, is becoming an instructional for new players, John, because You've just, in a nutshell, explained why process is so important. You often see decision making processes go off the rails because there's clearly no predefined, agreed process being followed, don't you?
It's one of the points I stress when I do the local government introduction to local government workshops.
Mm.
The public sector can be criticised for being bureaucratic and taking forever to make decisions, and that's because it's being compared to the private sector, where it's a private business and individuals, they own their businesses, their investment, they own it, they're the decision maker. That's fine. The public sector, it's public money. And it's not just a matter of, we'll stick to local government here, of the councillors just making the decision. They are there, they're elected to represent the interest of the community. So, what are the interests of the community? So it's making the decision is one point, but the process by which you go through to arrive at that decision is just as, if not more important than the actual decision itself.
Mm-hmm.
Did everyone who's impacted have an opportunity to have a say? Were they listened to? Were their concerns responded to? It doesn't mean that you agreed with everything that was said, and it doesn't mean that everyone's going to agree with your decision. But if at the end of it, if when the decision's made, all the protagonists or the stakeholders can go, well, I was listened to. I had a chance to have my say. That is a good process.
Yeah. But that's becoming harder, though, isn't it? I have this conversation a lot lately with people, this idea of being able to agree to disagree, the contest of ideas. It's become more challenging because people don't want to have the debate, do they? They have a fixed position and shut down new ideas. And have you seen that yourself playing out in more recent times?
Oh, Chris, yes. We'll stick to local government here, but the broader political environment today, particularly with the impact of social media, there's people who will read certain newspapers or listen to certain radio programs or watch particular TV broadcasts. It's because those outlets have a particular bias or a particular value set that they promote. And people are listening to the information sources that reinforce their own value sets, Chris.
Yes, yeah, the echo chambers.
Yes, and we hear it today, misinformation, false media,
Yeah, absolutely. As you were talking about process, I was thinking about Donald Trump and the obvious lack of a process for a lot of what's happening at the moment. But we don't want to go down that path, John. To hear you talk, it sounds like you've got all the answers, you know how to play the game, but I'm sure particularly in those early years, you must have made some mistakes. What comes to mind when I say to you, what would you like to do over if you had the chance?
No one's listening to this, are they, Chris?
Many hundreds, actually, John.
I once made a flippant comment to a journalist at the old Leader newspaper group when I was at Burundara. And I learnt never, ever make a flippant comment. It was said in jest as a joke.
Yeah.
It was the front page next week.
And it didn't seem so funny on the front page?
Oh, it was not funny. It was not funny. And when my boss, the CEO at the time, asked me about it still wasn't funny, Chris.
No.
And sitting in front of the councillors, it wasn't funny. No.
Lesson learned.
Oh, lesson learned. It was it just kicked off a storm. Yeah. And it was my own fault.
So something that you clearly carried with you. What about as a CEO? Anything that you perhaps didn't go the way you'd planned and in hindsight you would do differently?
My attitude as a CEO was I can't control the decision, but if I'm comfortable that we gave the best advice and we had good process and we really informed the councillors to make that decision, you have to accept it. And that was, I'd always say to my colleagues, the general managers and the people in the employees of the council was, if it's a legal decision, we implement it.
Yeah. I was having that very conversation with a second level at a council, won't name them obviously, just very recently, about how they struggle with managing the staff disappointment when the council makes a decision perhaps that doesn't go the way they thought it should or hoped it would. What's your approach to managing those staff expectations in what's becoming a more inherently political environment all of the time?
I think you've got to have the discussion with your team up front. Our role in this, particularly something that's controversial, and like all long-term CEOs, with plenty of controversial issues that we've all been involved in, and you don't do it on your own. You do it with a team of people. You have your general managers, you have your technical staff, you have your comms staff involved, etc. Chris, you have to sit down with them and go, you talk about your strategy and you talk about how you're going to, who are the stakeholders, how are you going to do this engagement, what are the timelines, where's the council sit in this, how do we best brief the council, when do we do that, what might the council do?
Yeah.
They might agree with us. They might agree with the officer's report, but you put up an officer's recommendation. The debate starts by moving a motion. They might move the officer's recommendation, they might modify it, or they might move something else entirely. That is their prerogative. They are the community's elected representatives. I agreed with most of the decisions of with the council meetings that I sat in on, but not all of them. But I'm not the council. I was there as the officer or the CEO, but that's democracy.
Do you think the newer CEOs coming through get that? You often hear from the community side accusations that CEOs are really the ones running the show and they're not respecting that democratic process, often around a particularly emotive issue, and there's two sides to every story, of course. But is it a skill set that CEOs perhaps need to work on more?
CEOs, I don't mix with the CEOs like I used to, but I am exposed to CEOs. And the ones that I have seen working, I'm impressed with them. They get it.
Good.
They understand it. But Chris, you look at the turnover rate with CEOs.
That's where I was getting to. Yeah, it's massive at the moment.
Not obviously, there are issues there, Chris. There are issues there. So, and I think that, I suspect, and this is based on a very small sample from my perspective, that people aspire to be a CEO, but then when they actually attain the position, they realise it is not exactly what they thought it was going to be. So the reality doesn't match the expectation. And I've seen other very capable general manager level individuals in local government who I have and still do think would be very good CEOs, but they have made decisions themselves that are not very comfortable being a general manager. I do not want the responsibility and the accountability that goes with being the CEO. I do not want to have to be managing the relationships between the organisation and the council. I do not want to be dealing with the phone calls, the meetings. It's that extra responsibility and pressure. They don't want it.
Yeah.
And I respect I respect their decisions because they understand what they want professionally, and they've got their, it's an overused term, but their work-life balance.
Yes.
They're happy with it. And congratulations to them.
It is an issue for the sector, though, and it's a topic that I also discussed. I don't know if you know Alistair Dawson, who's a former council CEO and university executive, on that very same topic. So look out for that in this series of The Well-Travelled Executive. John, I want to move on to, I think you'd been in the role at Kingston for about 7 or 8 years when there was a pretty devastating blow, both personally and professionally for you, wasn't there?
Oh, yes. I was a runner. That was what I did recreationally. I did distance running, and there was a run I used to do, and up this Huntingdale Road. It's got quite a few hills in it, and I'd run from home and I'd run up and down those hills, and it'd be like 15k run before I went to work in the morning a couple of times a week. And I found that I was struggling to run up some of the hills, Chris. And then it got to the point I had to stop and walk up. I thought, going to the doctor.
You probably initially just thought, oh, I'm getting older. It's just getting a bit harder. Yeah,
I just thought I'm getting older.
Yeah.
It's getting beyond me.
Yeah.
So I went to the doctor and he did a blood test. And Chris, it's not a good thing when you go to the doctor in the morning and he rings you mid-afternoon and says, I need you to come straight back.
Oh, wow.
And it's not a good phone call.
Yeah.
So he said, came back and he said, I'll bring your wife, by the way.
Oh.
So I went there and he told me I had leukemia. He suspected I had leukemia. And I was sent off to Cabrini and I saw a specialist there. And I was being monitored and I was fine. And I was still able to run. I was still riding my road bike, and I then got an infection in my spine. I got salmonella poisoning in my spine, and I was treated for that, but that triggered the leukemia, and it went from being stable and manageable to, and I always remember this, the doctor came into my room. I was at Cabrini recovering from the spinal surgery, and he said, I want you to remember at the end of this, it was 9 o'clock at night, and he said, I want you to remember at the end of this conversation, you've got hope. So I thought, I said to him, poor attempt at humour, Chris, doctor, I guess I should turn off the TV and sit up for this conversation.
Well, your sense of humour was still intact at that point.
Still was.
Yeah.
And he said, you need to start chemotherapy tomorrow morning.
Wow.
And that was 6 months of chemotherapy. So I'd be 5 or 7 days in hospital, connected up for the chemotherapy. I would come home. The first week at home, I would feel terrible. The second week, I'd start to feel better. The third week, I'd go and start it again.
What had you done work-wise at this point? Had you taken leave or were you still working?
I had met with the mayor and then the councillors and told them it was phone calls.
Right.
It was phone calls because I was in hospital at this point. And I spoke with them. And they were amazingly supportive, Chris. They were just, they didn't have to renew my contract.
Yeah. So that happened while you were on sick leave, wasn't it? Your contract got renewed.
I took sick leave.
Yeah.
I took my sick leave and then I was off work for 12 months because I had 6 months of chemotherapy and then I had a stem cell transplant from an unrelated donor. Someone in Germany was on the International Bone Marrow Register, was a match for me, and their stem cells were flowing out to Australia, and I received the stem cells, so I had a stem cell transplant. But then I was back at work. I went back to work at the start of July 25th, 2014. And it was a combination of sick leave and long service leave that I had.
So that reaction from the council speaks volumes for the regard that you were held in, quite clearly, because to renew your contract, as you say, when you're on leave, your contracts run out. They didn't have to do that.
No, they didn't have to do that, Chris. No, they were amazing, absolutely amazing.
Do you regard yourself as a positive person?
I try to be, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So in dealing with a situation like that, How important is that positivity, do you believe, to get through it the way you have?
It was, I never jumped ahead. It was, okay, this week I'm having chemotherapy and then next week I'll go home. Okay, I've got 6 rounds of this to go. I've had 1 round, I've got 5 to go. Okay, I've had 2, I've got
4 to go.
4 to go. So it was just like that. And then I had a break, and then I was having my stem cell transplant on the 23rd of January 2014 at 12 o'clock. And I'll do that. And then I'm in isolation for, I think it was 15 days I was in isolation, because you have no immune system. And it's a special part of the hospital, Royal Melbourne Hospital, where it has its own air conditioning, etc., because they can't afford for any infections to get in there for the patients, the stem cell transplant patients. It was like, okay, one step at a time. Don't get ahead, just do the next step and stay focused. And the public health system in Victoria, from my perspective, is absolutely amazing. I was in the deep end of it, Chris. I had and have private health insurance, but everything I had was in the public health system. It was so regardless of your background or your financial status, you got exactly the same treatment, and it was by world-renowned experts who are all part of Victoria's public health system.
Yeah.
Can't speak highly enough of it.
And clearly, it all worked.
Yes. I had a clean run for up until 2023, and then the leukemia came back.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Sue and I were in Portugal and Spain, and I was struggling. And when we came back, I went back and they saw my specialists, and they said we need to do tests. And I had a series of tests. And I was in and out of hospital, and said, "Oh, the leukemia's back. It's just described as in your wet areas, my lungs and sinuses." But Chris, the advances in treating blood cancers are absolutely amazing. So 10 years ago, I would have had to go back and have chemotherapy again and possibly another stem cell transplant. Today, Chris, I take 4 tablets a day.
Wow.
And it's a drug trial at Peter Mac that I'm on.
Yeah.
And the drug, it kills the leukemia cells and removes the leukemia cells from your body. So 10 years ago, it would have been chemotherapy. These days, just take these 4 tablets each day. And I go back every 3 months, and they do tests, and it works.
That's incredible.
I'm the beneficiary of all that, hence my involvement with Snowdome to help raise funds for blood cancer research.
Yeah, full circle to that involvement that you mentioned at the outset. How has that changed your outlook now on life? You've got that 3-monthly process, the tablets every day. I know you've just come back from a trip to Vietnam, and you were telling me before we recorded you can't wait to go back. Is there a drive now to do those things as soon as you possibly can, just in case?
Just don't sweat the small stuff, Chris.
Yeah.
Literally, just don't. There are bigger issues. Be grateful for what you have. Enjoy life. Be a good person.
Yeah.
And try to do the right thing all the time.
Thanks for sharing that very personal challenge with us, and obviously all power to you going forward. Is there anything in your career now, being semi-retired as we've established, that you still want to do, would like to do, but haven't had the chance to do yet?
I chair a company called Symphony 3, and it's digital technology and it's integration software. And I get enormous enjoyment and pleasure out of that. I like the people I work with, and having that involvement, it's for me, that's my professional interest now. I enjoy doing the workshops for LG Pro, the Introduction to Local Government workshops. There's some great people joining local government, really smart, highly motivated individuals that, for me, I think they're going to be good servants for the community into the future, Chris. I enjoy that, and it's having those, some professional interests, but then I enjoy catching up with my friends. I enjoy going on holidays with my wife. I take the dog for a walk after this interview. I'm going to take the dog to the local coffee shop and have a coffee with my dog.
What sort of a dog have you got?
Cross between a Jack Russell and a Shih Tzu.
Perfect.
It is curled up at my feet as we speak, Chris.
Perfect. And of course, going on podcasts. Maybe you can do more of this, John.
It's a pleasure talking to good people like yourself who ask good, interesting questions, Chris.
Excellent. Look, it's been great. I've probably held you longer than I was planning to, but you've got such a great story to tell, and you have done everything that's come your way with great positivity, and you're so highly regarded in the local government sector. I just, had to have you on, and I'm really pleased you took up the invitation.
Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure.
John Nevins, lovely to talk to you. Hope we can talk again. All the best.
Thank you, Chris. Bye.
Thanks for joining me for this latest instalment in the Well-Travelled Executive Series. Don't forget to check out the other episodes in the series from the Local Government News Roundup, Australia's #1 podcast for news and interviews about the local government sector in Australia and beyond. The podcast is brought to you by the Victorian Local Governance Association, the national broadcaster on all things local government, with support from Symphony 3, simple, connected customer experiences. Our program is produced in the city of Greater Geelong on the land of the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I hope you'll join me again soon. Until then, thanks for listening and bye for now. I'm thrilled to welcome Symphony 3 to the Local Government News Roundup family. If you're a local council, you know how challenging it can be to manage data across all your different systems. That's where Symphony 3 comes in. They've developed Smart Glue, a platform that integrates over 55 council systems, automating data flow without the need for manual work. It turns confusion into simplicity. With Smart Glue, councils save time, reduce errors and empower staff to focus on what really matters. Their clients see a real difference, up to 20% boost in productivity, with savings of over $30,000 per integration every year. Symphony 3 helps councils work smarter, faster and more efficiently, all while better supporting the communities they serve.